Hey, my friends, welcome back to another episode of the Daily Dose. We are on day number 232. Day number 232. We are still moving on through the book of Second Chronicles. Moving on through. Psalm number 77 is our psalm for today. And as far as Second Chronicles goes, we're looking at chapters 25 through 27. Lately, I've just been kind of glancing over some of the main bullet points for our text in Chronicles. But today, we talk about a few different kings, and there's a couple of interesting things to note, even though this is kind of review. So we're going to go ahead and look at a few of these bullet points and make some notes and comments along the way, okay? So again, 2 Chronicles 25 through 27. The first section that we look at is about a dude named Amaziah. You remember that name? Probably not, right? We've looked at so many names over the course of this 232-day period we've been on so far, and we have come across Amaziah's name before. Now we're going to see it again. And here's something we read about Amaziah. It says, Amaziah called the people of Judah together and assigned them according to their families to commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds for all Judah and Benjamin. He then mustered those 20-year-olds He then mustered those 20 years old or more and found that there were 300,000 men fit for military service, able to handle the spear and the shield. Okay, so for the military nowadays, the draft age, or the age to join the military, as far as I know, is still 18. And do you ever think about that? The age for being able to join the military, right? You have to be 18 years old to join the military here in the United States. And that's a pretty huge responsibility, right? You're basically signing up to potentially give your life, right? You're not automatically going to be doing that, but by joining the armed services, there's a very real possibility that if you have to go anywhere to war or engage in any kind of battle, you could be risking your life. And I've always thought that it was interesting that you have to be 18 to do that, but you have to be 21 to be able to legally drink alcohol in the United States, right? To enjoy an adult beverage, right? How do y'all feel about that? I'm just curious that someone is old enough and mature enough to be able to sign up to risk their life for their country at 18, but they're not old enough or mature enough to be able to get some alcoholic beverages until the age of 21. Something interesting to think about. Anyways, so back then the age was 20 years old, right? That was considered the age of somebody who was a fighting age man, okay? So there were 300,000 men that were fit for military service in this example that we're reading about, this story. They were able to handle the spear and the shield, right? So, of course, back then they didn't have guns. They didn't have AR-15s. They didn't even have muskets. They had swords, and they had shields, and they had spears, right? So we also read that Amaziah hired 100,000 fighting men from Israel for 100 talents. So remember, at this time, the tribes were divided, okay? You had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So Amaziah was the king of Judah, right? He was the king of Judah, and then we see Benjamin was grouped in here, right? But then from the remaining tribes, which were collectively referred to as Israel, he hired 100,000 fighting men for 100 talents of silver, okay? But this is what I'm getting at right here. But a man of God came to him, to Amaziah, and said, Your Majesty, these troops from Israel must not march with you, for the Lord is not with Israel, not with any of the people of Ephraim. That was kind of a collective way to refer to the people of Israel, I believe. So it says, even if you go and fight courageously in battle, God will overthrow you before the enemy, for God has the power to help or to overthrow. Okay, so here this man of God is saying, look, if you go and you have these 100,000 fighting men from Israel, God's not going to be with you in this. So Amaziah asks this man of God, this prophet, he says, but what about the 100,000 talents I paid for the Israelite troops, right? So Amaziah is like, look, you're telling me that God's not in this and that I can't go to battle and that I just, hired these basically these mercenary type soldiers. What about my money? They're not going to give me my money back. I've already paid them, right? So what am I supposed to do? Then the man of God or the prophet replies, the Lord can give you much more than that. Notice the principle there, friends. Somebody thought that they were doing the right thing. Somebody thought they were doing the will of God. Somebody invested a huge sum of money in what they were planning and trying to do, right? Getting ready to go to battle. They spent 100,000 talents. Excuse me, 100,000 talents. I'm getting my numbers mixed up. They hired 100,000 soldiers for 100 talents, right? That's a ton of money. And now a prophet is basically saying, look, God's not in this. It's going to be a waste of your time, a waste of money, and a waste of the lives of your men if you go to war. So Amaziah is saying, okay, I hear you. I thought I was doing the will of God, and now you're telling me that's not. Okay, so I'll put a halt on my plan. But what about all that money? It's wasted, right? And the prophet says the Lord can give you much more than that. Friends, I think the same thing applies in our lives. And one example that I can give you is before I started walking with the Lord, I enjoyed gangster rap music, right? That was kind of my jam. I loved the old school hip hop, the 90s especially, right? The old Dr. Dre and Snoop and Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. and one of my all-time favorites, Bone Thugs and Harmony. And that was my thing, right? Well, when I came to Christ, or when I came closer to Christ, right? Because my mom walked me through saying the sinner's prayer when I was somewhere around 6 years old, something like that, give or take, right? And so I would say that I probably accepted Jesus to come into my life at that point, but I didn't really walk with him. I didn't really know him. Maybe I wasn't really saved. I don't know. But when I was in my early to mid-20s, I kind of got this desire to start reading my Bible and actually walking with the Lord. And when I started doing that, one of the first things that I got convicted about was the music I was listening to because of the lyrics and all of the inappropriate stuff that was talked about in those songs, right? I still loved the music. I loved the beat. I just loved the way that the rappers would make the words rhyme together. I loved everything about the art of hip-hop, of rap music, right? But I had this dilemma. I'm like, okay, well, I love the music, and I'm very invested in kind of the culture and that kind of thing. But where am I going to find quality hip-hop that doesn't have this kind of language in it, right? Because that kind of language did not fit in with where I was in my walk with God, right? So I did a little bit of research, and I found that there were plenty of Christian rap artists out there, right? And many of these Christian rap artists were almost as good, or as good, in some cases even better, than the mainstream gangster rap hip-hop artists, so to speak, right? So, I kind of felt the Holy Spirit saying, Adam, it's time for this particular music to go. And so I'm saying to myself, what about all the money I've invested in these 200 CDs that I've got in my CD booklet thing, on my CD shelf? What about all this money I've invested, right? Am I just supposed to throw all that away? And then it's almost like God said, you know what? I'll give you much more than that, just like he said here. And so my eyes were open to this whole new world of Christian contemporary music. And I'm not big on most contemporary Christian worship songs, not because of the lyrics, but just because the music nowadays, it's not really my thing. But there are so many cool, super cool bands that are Christian bands with good lyrics that are more my type of music. I like some kind of, some hard rock. I like definitely some hip hop. There's a variety of musical genres that I enjoy, and I've been able to find Christian artists that perform in all of those genres that are so good and so fulfilling. So it's kind of like God said, look, I don't want you to do that. And I'm like, okay, well, what about all the stuff I've got? And God was like, no, don't worry about it. I'll give you stuff way better than that. And isn't that the kind of God we serve, friends? That when God asks us to give something up, more times than not, it's because he has something even better planned for us, right? We're like, but God, I don't want to give that up. What about, and then you've got all these excuses. And then it's almost as if God is saying, I'll give you so much more than that. You just have to trust me. It may not make sense right now. You may not see the results you want to see right now, but I will give you something so much better. Trust me, right? So that is why this particular little group of verses means so much to me and spoke to me, and that's why I wanted to just touch on it a little bit, because I think that principle applies, in some way, shape, or form to all of our lives, right? So that's really all I've got for y'all for today. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to me go on my little rant here for a little bit. But that's pretty much it. The only other little bullet points in today's text is next we look at Uzziah, the king of Judah, and Jotham, king of Judah. And yeah, you can go read about those guys. Like I said, we've covered them. It's review. And but there is plenty of cool little things you can glean from those remaining sections that I'm not going to cover with y'all today. But hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for your time, and I appreciate you. And until we meet again, deuces.